This is somewhat urgent. My mother-in-law is insanely entitled, and my wife's enabling of her has made our marriage very hard at times. Mother-in-law has come to us for money many times because she keeps spending herself into a hole because she's a hoarder. Recently, she came to us wanting me specifically to buy her a new smartphone, and she threw a massive fit when I refused. I had quite a collection of vintage skeleton keys, and I mean good ones, like ones to particular hotels, the large ornate sergeants, brass railroad keys, etc. My collection as a whole should have easily been worth $2,000 to $3,000. I kept them in a locked display cabinet. But yesterday, I came home to find my entire collection gone. The cabinet had been forced open. I checked the CCTV for the living room and saw my mother-in-law force open the cabinet with a small crowbar. I called mother-in-law and demanded she return my entire collection. She nonchalantly told me she sold the entire collection at pawn already and used the money for her new phone. Then said it was my fault and she had to do it because I wouldn't give her the money. My wife was seemingly on my side until I said I was going to call the police. Now she's begging me to just drop it, and even suggested I just start a new collection. A lot of those keys are irreplaceable, and I spent 10 years building that collection. Mother-in-law has been trouble in the past, but this is the first time I know that she's stolen from us. I need help. Edit. It hasn't even been an hour, and this has been made pretty clear to me. I'm calling the police. My wife is at work right now, so she won't be here to object. Update. Texted mother-in-law and goaded her into admitting everything she did, which pawn shop she went to, and how much she sold my collection for. So now I've got plenty of evidence. We'll update again in a separate post on my profile later. My wife bailed out her mother with our shared money. One day later. This is just a small update. I plan on a big one in roughly a week, but I'm taking some time off work, locking down my credit, and I've got an appointment for a consultation with a divorce lawyer tomorrow. I'm honestly surprised I got one this soon. No, I don't have the keys back yet. Police still have them. But they'll be returned soon. I think they have to go through it all and compare it to the documentation I provided. But my wife and I had a big fight because she took the money to bail out her mother and pay off the pawn shop from our joint bank account. I'm removing any money I have in that account tomorrow. My wife can have what's left. That was all hers. I haven't been sleeping well, and the stress is giving me migraines. But I'm determined to power through this. 3 days later, I got my skeleton key collection back from police. My mother-in-law is insanely entitled, and my wife's enabling of her has made our marriage very hard at times. Mother-in-law has come to us for money a lot because she keeps spending herself into a hole since she's a hoarder and a shopaholic. Her house is full of garbage, junk, and unopened stuff she never uses. The house is rodent-infested too. She has one semi-clean room in the whole building, and it's the master bedroom. She's mocked it up like a little studio apartment with a futon to sleep on and use as a couch, an entertainment center with TV and streaming, and a makeshift kitchen consisting of the adjoining bathroom, a mini fridge, and a microwave. Mother-in-law's also overweight because she eats out a lot. Recently, mother-in-law came to us wanting me specifically to buy her a new smartphone as an unprompted gift, and she threw a massive fit when I refused. And I mean a child temper tantrum kind of fit. Why did she want a new phone so suddenly? Hers was 2 years old, that's literally it. As far as I know, it still worked fine. Even my wife has confirmed this. But mother-in-law was resolute that she deserved a new phone. And before leaving, mother-in-law yelled at us that we're supposed to be pampering her now that she's an old woman. She's 53. My wife also didn't want to buy her mother the phone because she gave her money not long before to make sure her bills were paid. I have quite a collection of vintage skeleton keys, and I mean good ones, like ones to particular hotels, the large ornate sergeants, brass railroad keys, reading hardware, etc. My collection as a whole should easily be worth $2,000 to $3,000. Some of those keys are super rare. I kept them in a locked display cabinet. But a few days ago, I came home to find my entire collection gone. The cabinet had been forced open. I checked the CCTV for the living room and saw my mother-in-law force open the cabinet with a small crowbar. She then put all the keys in a couple of boxes she'd brought with her and left with them. I called mother-in-law right away and demanded she return my collection. She nonchalantly told me she sold the entire collection at pawn already and used the money for her new phone. Then said it was my fault and she had to do it because I wouldn't give her the money. My wife was seemingly on my side until I said I was going to call the police. She begged me to just drop it, and even suggested I just start a new collection. I refused to let it go, because a lot of those keys are not only expensive, they're irreplaceable. I spent 10 years building that collection, but my wife kept blowing up at me and telling me to just let it go. So I slept in the guest room that night and sought online help the next day when my best friend told me to try Reddit. I'd been a lurker before, but making an account wasn't hard. My mother-in-law has been troubled in the past, but this was the first time I knew that she'd stolen from us. I needed help, so I asked here. The resounding advice finally made me pull my head out of my bum to realize I was the only one keeping my marriage afloat, and it would likely never get any better if my wife wasn't on my side when her own mother steals something irreplaceable from me. Now to answer some quick questions I got before. 1. How did mother-in-law get into the house? My wife unilaterally gave her a key when we moved in. That's why. 2. Why did I have CCTV cameras in the living room? Really? Wouldn't you do that if you had something valuable on display there? 3. Is mother-in-law on drugs? No idea. She's always been crazy. 4. Did mother-in-law steal from us before? Not that I have been able to tell, and I've checked everything I could think of. 5. What kind of phone did mother-in-law get? Not a clue, but probably one of the cheaper smartphones with the amount of money she got selling my stuff. Unless she's on a payment plan. 6. Did my wife use my money to placate her mother before? Yes, she did. We primarily have separate accounts, but we do have a joint account we pay the bills with, so it's not used for savings. In 2 years of marriage, I'd say it happened roughly 5 times. Every time my wife took money from the joint account for her mother, she always replaced it on her next payday. Though in hindsight, I think she only did so because she knew I'd never let it go, because she would always have an attitude with me for a few days after. I was in a bad marriage fog before, but this whole situation has snapped me right out of it. 7. Will I lock down my credit? Already I have, though I'm not sure my wife or her mother would be so stupid to do something like that after mother-in-law was recently arrested. Back to what happened that day. Police did come and take my statement a bit over an hour after I called the non-emergency line. I had video footage and the documentation of my collection ready, and then there was some texts I went out of my way to get from mother-in-law to bait her into a confession. I wanted as much evidence as possible so she couldn't lie to police. When I texted her demanding she get my collection back, she actually LOL and told me not to take a chance, and even boasted that she thought I was a pathetic son-in-law and my key collection was tacky anyway. I told her to at least tell me what pawn shop she sold the keys to so I could go buy them back and how much they paid her for them. And the dimwit admitted it all right away with glee in text. I had everything I needed for the police before they even showed up. The cops took the whole matter more seriously than I thought. I was worried they'd call it a civil matter since the thief was my mother-in-law and she had a key to the house, but they arrested my mother-in-law before long, and the police went to the pawn shop before it closed to retrieve my collection. I got it all back from the police after a couple of days, and for the moment, I've put the collection in a safe, secure place that no one can get to. The pawn shop pretty much gave up the entire key collection to police right away, like it was a bag of hot potatoes. Though I scrutinized every important key brought back, as far as I can tell, it's all there. That was a huge sigh of relief. I took time off work and barely slept for 2 days because of this ordeal. Also, the cabinet mother-in-law broke into is pretty much a loss since she mangled the lock and doors prying it open. Thankfully, it wasn't an antique and just something I got used for $50, so I'm just going to take it to the dump sooner or later. From her texts before, I found out mother-in-law sold the whole collection to the pawn for a whopping total of $300. For a collection of hundreds of antique keys valued at 2 to 3 grand as a total, that low number felt like a punch in the gut to me. Likely, the pawnbroker knew how valuable the collection could be as a whole. I mean, it's not like hitting a jackpot or anything. But money is still money, especially when a dumb little lady walks in with a box of goodies. Anyone else hear Mr. Krabs laughing? Anyway, the cost of repayment to the shop was supposed to be on mother-in-law, but my wife paid them back out of our joint account instead. From what the shop owner said, mother-in-law told them the key collection belonged to her deceased husband, and she was sick of the whole collection sitting in storage. So they believed her. But just to be clear, she's not a widow. Her husband divorced her and left the state around 15 years ago. Mother-in-law lives off Social Security and food stamps. She also holds garage sales every few months, and she often demanded our soda and beer cans so she could get the deposit money recycling them. Mother-in-law doesn't drive. She gets around on an electric scooter that tows a bicycle trailer. She lives in a long paid-off house, and she would not be having money troubles if she wasn't overspending every month. And she always counts on my wife to pick up the slack when she comes up short. My wife and I got in a huge fight when she got home because I had her mother arrested. But I told her I'm done with her enabling of her toxic mother. I said I was changing the locks as soon as possible and banning her mother from the house. And I also said that either we got marriage counseling or I'd be inquiring about my options for separation from an attorney. I thought my wife would beg me not to do that. But instead, she just called me horrible, packed a suitcase and walked out to go to a motel. I just sat on the couch and let her go. She repeatedly looked like she was waiting for me to ask her to stay. But I didn't. In the morning, she texted me she'd be bailing her mother out and wanted me transfer her the money to pay for it since I was the one who got her mother arrested. When I said no, all I got back was a sarcastic, "Wow," and that was it. Not too long later, I had a gut feeling and checked the balance on the shared bank account. And my wife had taken out a lot of money. I wasn't sure if all that was needed for bail, so I called the pawn shop later. The owner confirmed my wife had come in and paid him back the $300 that he'd paid her mother for the keys. He was also quite angry and said he didn't want any of us in his shop ever again. I understood his anger and, weirdly enough, had a fairly long talk with this guy. And he understood I'm not part of the crazy. I tried to call and text my wife for hours, but she didn't answer. That evening, I managed to find her. I knew which motel she'd likely go to, and I was right. It was both cheap and not far away. I found her car and then figured out which room she was in. She looked positively shocked to see me when she opened the door. I confronted her about the money she'd used from our shared account. She basically said that since I refused to pay her mother's bail after I was the one who had her arrested, she got the money from me another way. Then smugly stated she wasn't paying that money back into the shared account this time and told me that's the karma I get before shutting the door in my face. Then said through the door she'd call the cops on me if I didn't leave. The smug look she'd given me reminded me of nasty teenage girls when they get their way. It really ticked me off. I already knew my marriage was pretty much over, but that night, it really sank in. I had a long sit-down with some old video games and cola to think about my future. The house is rented, so I'm not renewing my half of the lease and will soon be apartment hunting. The last month of the lease is March, but I may leave sooner, depending on how soon I can find an apartment. We have no kids yet, thank God. So that's another thing I currently have in my favor. The next day, I changed the locks on the house and removed all of my money from the joint bank account and stopped all automated payments to and from it. I made sure to take only the amount of money I'd put into the account. There was still more than enough in it for me to break even and still leave the minimum required balance on the account. Either way, the cost of mother-in-law's bail and paying back the pawn shop was now entirely out of my wife's pocket, and I don't think she's noticed yet. But it shouldn't be long. I've been to a couple different divorce lawyers already, and I picked the second one since the first seemed like they were only there for a paycheck. I'll have the divorce papers served soon. I loved my wife, but it's clear she didn't love me, so I can't stay with her anymore. She can have her thieving hoarder mommy all to herself now. We both have very comparable incomes, so I'll be pushing for a clean, split divorce. This woman didn't deserve me, and I fell for her act. She didn't want a husband, she wanted an insurance plan. I will pursue any charges still possible against her mother. I'll update again when more happens. But I'll be clear on this, I won't be changing my mind. My soon-to-be ex-wife can beg and love bomb all she wants, if she even bothers to. I've never been her number one, and I'm not going to settle for being number two in my own marriage. It is over. A few months ago, I anonymously reported my mother-in-law as a serious hoarder. Someone here commented I should report my mother-in-law's hoarding to the fire marshal, and at the time I decided to do it because I was angry and wanted to get back at her for stealing my collection from me and making my life hell. Mother-in-law had been building a hoard in her house since my wife was a teenager. The house was filled nearly to the brim with rotten garbage and was rodent-infested. I've actually seen rats there. I made a call to the city from a number I Googled. At first, I thought nothing came of it as weeks went by, but I guess someone looked into it because mother-in-law's house was given an inspection. The house was found to be in even worse shape than I thought. It was not only a serious fire hazard to itself and everything around it, and rodent-infested. There were also some exposed electrical wires, a roof leak that's gone unfixed for years that caused bad rot damage and black mold. The outside of the house didn't look that bad, and it was in a neighborhood full of old houses that looked similar, which is likely why no one reported it till I did. My soon-to-be ex-wife figured out it was me who reported her mother, what with the timing and all. She came home and ranted to me about all the things her mother told her the inspector found, and how her mother was likely to lose her house now. But it was only a matter of time before something like that happened. If I didn't report her mother, someone else eventually would have. Soon-to-be ex screamed at me that I was a horrible, deceitful person. I asked her if she wanted to be the pot or the kettle, then reminded her of all the reasons why we were separating. I ended up losing my cool and ranted at her, saying that her enabling of her mother caused this. Her acting like her mother stealing my irreplaceable skeleton key collection I've spent a decade building wasn't important because of this. And her selfish, unilateral decision-making and bratty behavior ever since we got married caused this. Couples are supposed to make decisions together. Instead, she just kept making them for us both, without even asking my input. So I made a unilateral decision of my own for once, and reported her mother's hoarding, which needed to be reported anyway because it's a danger to her and the people around her. I told her I was long sick of just sucking it all up all the time, and just letting things pass while they acted like I was the bad guy and walked all over me. Her mother would get nothing more from me. And maybe she wouldn't be as crazy once she's no longer living in a house filled with fumes of rotten garbage, rodent excrement, and black freaking mold. She just walked away sniffling and cursing me. Yeah, I know I went too far. I'd been reduced to being just as petty as her. I made that call because I was angry. But I had no choice but to stand by that decision after I'd done it. Mother-in-law ended up demanding my soon-to-be ex-foot the cost of cleaning and restoring the house, but she couldn't afford it. From what I heard, mother-in-law went off on her with her demands and told her to get the money any way she could, even demanding I pay for it since I was the one who reported the house. She even said to sue me, but soon-to-be ex told her it wouldn't work. The house was in exceedingly poor shape. Rotten garbage, exposed wires, roof leaks, rot, and black mold. No one should be living in that. When soon-to-be ex tried to tell her mother she couldn't afford to pay for the house to be cleaned and renovated, her mother actually attacked her like a wild animal. She hit and scratched her multiple times and tried to pull her hair out. That's when it happened. My mother-in-law had a heart attack on the spot. Going ape on her daughter must have triggered it. Soon-to-be ex called 911 while looking for aspirin in the house. But by the time help had arrived, her mother had expired. Soon-to-be ex came home with a police officer in tow for some reason and was absolutely mad, screaming at me about what just happened to her mother. She said this was all my fault. And in all of her ranting, I found out her mother had a weak heart. It's the real reason why she was on disability. The officer had to separate soon-to-be ex-wife from me, and she fell onto the couch sobbing. I hated mother-in-law with a passion. But I wasn't trying to end her life. I still feel great guilt over this. From what the police officer said and from what my soon-to-be ex-wife said, I pieced the story together and later typed it out, but I just couldn't bring myself to post it. I was still racked with guilt and just had to take a serious break from Reddit. That evening, when I found out my mother-in-law had passed away, soon-to-be ex-wife managed to calm down long enough to speak to the police officer more clearly about what happened. But she also kept shifting between blaming herself and blaming me. I asked her from across the room why I was never told about her mother's heart condition. And she yelled, "It was none of my damn business." But it explains why mother-in-law used to dramatically put her hand on her chest and cry so many times when she wasn't getting her way. My soon-to-be ex-wife ended up going crazy in the bathroom she'd been using since we started sleeping separately. She asked the police officer for a moment to herself, then just went crazy after shutting the door. She came out a few minutes later, looking angry but calm. Then told me I was cleaning that mess up. She packed her bags again and left the house for the motel once more and told me she wouldn't be coming back unless it was to get her stuff. I was so guilt-ridden that I was hardly able to function for days back then and had to take leave from work because of stress migraines. I basically spent 3 days on the couch, hopped up on meds. But after that, I got my ass in gear again. My friends all tell me it wasn't not my fault. I didn't know, and mother-in-law was crazy. Either way, what's done is done, and I have to live with it. Sadly, there's more that happened, which I'll be telling in another post. Very few were against me in the comments, but I don't blame those that were. Yeah, mother-in-law's heart condition was unknown to me, and I set things in motion by calling the fire marshal. And I understand hoarding is a bad mental disorder. I am guilty for that. I'm not made of stone, but at the same time, my mother-in-law was a narcissist who loved walking all over me and anyone else, even her own daughter. Yes, I understand it's a scary thing to lose one's home, but if you don't treat your home as a home and let it turn into a moldy and infested den, then you've let your home down. She was only able to live in one room of it because the rest was so bad. And about a week ago, I drove by the property and saw mother-in-law's house had been torn down. There's nothing but an empty lot now. Guess it was deemed an unsalvageable biohazard. I am officially single now, as my divorce ended a couple of weeks ago. My ex-wife did try to drag things out a little, and she annoyed me with the help of a last-minute flying monkey, which failed miserably. In fact, I'd say my ex seems pretty broken now. Aside from the fact her mother was not only quite a financial and emotional drain for her when she was still alive, my ex was also heavily dependent on needing her love and validation, in part because her father walked out on them both. Of course, giving filial piety to a narcissist is exactly what they want. So my ex made some bad choices. After her mother died, she tried to put me through hell all over again, but it ended up rebounding on her repeatedly, to basically give everything on that flying monkey in one paragraph. She contacted me in mid-August and woke me up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I answered the phone by reflex, and this FM was quite the diva, if that's an apt description. This final woman went off on me in a similar way to how my mother did when my ex went crying to her and basically tried to start an argument with me. She asked if I was my name first, and then let out an hum when I answered. Then she started accusing me and followed that up by saying, "I need Jesus." I was too tired to give a damn and just hung up and blocked the number. Still ruined my Sunday though. The FM tried to get at me on social media next. That was her big mistake. Her account had her name and face on it, which I screenshotted. I told her I'd file a case for harassment against me if she didn't leave me alone. She promptly shut up and blocked me. I then contacted my ex through text and told her I don't give a damn what new friends she makes. If she keeps trying to defame me by telling lies about me to people, I'll sue her. I already had the evidence I needed. She surprisingly admitted fault, told me it would not happen again, and that was the end of that. Back to my divorce. A few months ago, a commenter gave me a bit of a fright that the timing of the police when my mother and ex showed up at my door was a little too convenient, and that they might have called them in advance so they'd show up just as I was going off on them. But I had CCTV proving my innocence, and that they had provoked me. Well, just in case, I had my lawyer do some digging, and there was thankfully no foul play. So I guess it really was just a neighbor who called the cops. But I still don't know who. That said, if it had been my ex or mother who called, we could have had my lawyer use it as ammo for a false police report. But it didn't matter in the end. My lawyer and I had a nice load of evidence to use in divorce court. Even the last-minute flying monkey was added to the pile. I have still been going to therapy, and I've been told that while my past with my mother, ex-wife, and mother-in-law was messed up, I did well despite the circumstances. But I'm having lingering trust issues towards women I just meet that is going to take time to get better. I'm just fine around female friends and other women I've known for a while. But any new woman I talk to, or even feel attracted to, I also instinctively avoid. My therapist did agree with me that my swearing off marriage for the rest of my life is just fine, and that not everyone needs to conform to that. But deep inside, I'm just instinctively seeing any new woman as bad to avoid getting close. And I have been working on getting better about it. My ex eventually admitted surrender in divorce court and ended up transferring out at her job. She moved to another state, and I only saw her in person again at the final divorce hearing. She didn't hire a lawyer for the divorce like I did. Maybe she knew she was screwed already, or maybe she just couldn't afford it. Her finances weren't nearly as good as mine since she previously gave a lot of money to her mother. In fact, I found out in the divorce that her credit was not good, not technically in the toilet, but she has debts to pay. I wasn't even aware of that went back to before we were married. I don't have specifics on those debts, other than they exist. But my ex admitted she was hoping for my help in paying them off. As in, she was hoping to make me pay them after turning me into her lapdog. But she and her mother poked at my biggest triggers, and I rebelled. And y'all can read my past posts to see what happened. But it's long and messy. Either way, she basically gave me and the court even more confirmation she was only married to me for financial security. My ex mostly avoided insulting me during the divorce hearings, much less look at me. She tried to act overly scared of me at first and still claimed her mother was dead because of me. I owned up to reporting to my mother-in-law's hoarder house, but I could have never imagined she'd have a heart attack. Also, the house was unlivable and a danger to mother-in-law and the people around it. The judge was appalled by all the information on its condition, which my ex was unable to deny. The judge also saw right through all my ex's manipulation tactics after seeing the stack of information I had on her and her mother. Once called out, she stopped crying, stood up straight, and just looked defeated. But among the stupid tactics she tried was talking about my bike. I think at that point she was just doing it to drag things out. She told the judge that she just hated bicycles. And as her, now former husband, I should have supported her by not owning a bike, let alone keeping one so old and beat up in the house. She described my old bike as a rusty thing she threw out because it annoyed her to look at it. Then she looked at me and said that going to the gym should have been enough for me. The judge looked at her like she was an idiot and told her that the bike was completely irrelevant, and then we moved on from the subject. And then right as the divorce ended, my ex cornered me in the lobby and had to make the bike her final idiotic dig at me by telling me she hoped I enjoyed my riding my bike because I obviously enjoyed riding it more than a beautiful woman like her. I told her there were so many things I could say to her at the moment, but I was just done. So I said to stop acting like a child, it was over, and to just leave me alone so we could get on with our lives. She stomped out the door. That was the last time I saw her in person. We didn't have any real shared assets. The house we used to live in together was rented. We both own our vehicles outright under our own names. We didn't have kids, and we both make about the same amount of money. But I still had the advantage with the recordings, CCTV, bank records, screenshots from social media, texts, the situation of her getting my mother involved, the FM, and other things I've spoken about in these posts. My ex didn't deny anything presented after seeing all the evidence. So in the end, she just talked about random things before finally agreeing to an amicable, clean split divorce. No alimony, and we just went our separate ways. Someone here also advised me to petition for my ex to change back to her maiden name, which I did. She agreed to it with no issue. For whatever reason, she called me and we spoke one last time over the phone just last week. She admitted that while she still hates my guts with a passion, she finally realized what her toxic mother had done to her. Not sure how well I believe that, but it doesn't matter anymore now. She said she'd made new friends after moving, and for once was only having to support herself and no one else. I wished her well, and that was that. So at least we didn't end on a bad note. Not really a good one either. Just very neutral. I'm a free man now. And I hope that my next partner that I possibly may have in time won't be like my ex.